My name is Jen Wilson. I'm predominantly a piano player, which led me on to research into jazz, which again pushed me into setting up the Women's Jazz Archive in 1986. And from an early age I was interested in feminism because I didn't know that I was a feminist until I found out what it was. Oh, I'm 74 by the way, so I go back a long time. When I started work at the age of 16 on Swansea Docks, we were always referred to as girls, and the office boy was always called Mr. Phillips. He didn't do anything except run up and down giving people bits of paper, whereas we were sort of typing up heavy-duty shipping documents and all sorts of things. So I always wondered at the time why he was called Mr. Phillips. And I was always called the office girl. And I suppose it was finding out how things were. So all the books I'd read and all the people I spoke to, they said there's never any women in jazz. And then I realised that there was absolutely nothing on Wales at all. All the books on jazz, Wales wasn't mentioned. Okay, let's narrow it down a bit. You know, what on earth was going on in Wales? So I was very interested in putting a story together in some shape or form and just making it accountable to Wales. You're only doing it because somebody, and a lot of people, and they were men, I have to say, said, why are you doing this? Because there's no need to do this, because there aren't any women jazz musicians, or if they are, they're not very good because you never hear about them. And I would say, well, you can't hear about them because you don't know about them, but they're there, and nobody's asked them. So the more men that told me, you can't do this, the more I dug my heels in and said, oh yes, I can. Which prompted me 5 years ago to start writing a book. Like I said in the beginning, the first inkling that you know things are not right, but you don't know why they are not right, and you don't know how they are not right is affecting you, was working as a secretary on the docks when I left school, because I had no idea of politics or anything like that, except I knew I was called a little girl because I was 16 when I started work as a shorthand typist. So I knew that obviously things weren't right. And then during the 70s, when I was playing in bands, I knew things weren't right, because if you turned up I was always referred to as somebody's girlfriend when I was the leader of the band and I was a piano player. So I said, excuse me. So there's this continual feed of being told that you're somebody when you know that you're not. I was playing a gig one day in a club somewhere and I was leading a trio. A man came up after. Right, he said, there aren't any women jazz musicians, are there? So I said, well, you've just sat there for 1.5 hours and watched one. And he said, but you're not a jazz musician. There aren't any women jazz musicians, are there? And I said, you're looking at one. And he said, well, there aren't any. So I said, why have you been sitting there? And he said, oh, he's just listening to the band. And I said, well, you've just answered your own question. So he got a bit marked and went off. These things were happening and I thought, well, something's not right. You know you're political, but in the 70s you don't realise that you're a feminist until somebody says, this is feminism, you know. Women being hidden from history. And history was just one sex's story. It was his story, you know, and it wasn't her story. And then I got really political. Swansea women opposed nuclear threat, and they were running buses up to Greenham Common when the Greenham Common peace activity started. And I thought, oh, you know, this was putting yourself on the line. Are you going to say, I'm a feminist and I don't agree with this, or are you going to go up and do something? So we all went off to Greenham for the big Embrace the Base. So it really politicised then when I saw how the police were being, oh God, they treated women dreadfully at Greenham Common. And all that stuff that was going on when we were going back and forth for those years with Greenham Common, that was a political eye-opener. What annoys me is when people say, well, you know, there's no point having feminism anymore, equality, and there's no need, which I think is a load of rubbish, because you try telling that to some women who perhaps haven't been treated like tidy by their partner and all the rest of it. You know, feminism is so important. It's the lifeblood of women, really, isn't it? And we can no longer sit here and say that we are second-class citizens, because there's no way. I think we've been put down in the past because men have always found us a threat. Looking back, I think I've had a little part in finding out these stories, and as part of Welsh history, to be thrown out of school for playing jazz and boogie on the piano in school has ended up being me being now a professor of practice at university. So the fact I was barred in school has in fact completely turned the tables, where I've contributed to Welsh feminist history in an unexpected way.